Now, the book of Isaiah may be a familiar book to many of us who have grown up in the church. The book of Isaiah is a very large and intimidating book. It is a long book. It's got 66 chapters. And Isaiah is actually one of the major prophets. We classify prophets into major prophets and minor prophets. It does not say anything about the importance of those prophets. It's only used to depict just how large or substantive their writings were. So Isaiah is one of the major prophets. And like I said, the book of Isaiah is a long book with 66 chapters. It is actually called the Gospel of the Old Testament because it is so rich in good news. It is rich in hope. Of course, it has stark warnings and messages of judgment, but it points people toward a glorious future. It has some of the best, the most well-known prophecies regarding the coming of the future Messiah. Isaiah chapter 53 is read in many churches on many Sundays, usually to, commemorate the events surrounding the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, the Anointed One, the Messiah. That is in the book of Isaiah. I want to begin with setting up what the historical context of the book is, because that will give us a good appreciation for the writings of Isaiah, what the passages point toward, and what makes it such a rich collection of glorious prophecies, including messianic prophecies. So let's look at the background first. Isaiah was the prophet who ministered in Judah. Judah is the southern kingdom. The United Kingdom under David was split into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. Isaiah is ministering in the southern kingdom of Judah from 740 to 681 BC. So it's a long ministry spanning decades. Although he's based primarily in Judah, he does address the northern kingdom of Israel. In fact, he witnesses the fall of the northern kingdom of Israel to Assyria, their enemies, a dominant and growing world power at that time. He writes many warnings not only to Israel but also to Judah to take heed lest the judgments that he is warning his people about come to pass. He writes a lot about judgment, of course, but he also writes a lot about salvation from sin, about repentance, about not rebelling against God, and then a future salvation when God would ultimately restore his people and unify them under the glorious kingdom of the Messiah. The book of Isaiah is a complex book, literally speaking. Let me say that again. The book of Isaiah is a complex book because of the rich and masterful writing of Isaiah. And it's also got some stylistic changes after chapter 39. So that has led some people to say it's actually written by two people. Both of them have the name Isaiah, but there are two authors. But Jesus himself refutes that because he, in the New Testament, he's citing a passage and he's referring to the same Isaiah as the author of both passages. So we need not have any doubt today whether the book of Isaiah was written by two Isaiahs or just one. We can be confident that it was the prophet Isaiah, the singular one man who wrote the entire book. However, he does write about events that he himself did not live to see. He's making predictions. He's prophesying under the Spirit of God. So he's covering several events written in the later half of the book that do not occur during his lifetime. Now let's just get a little bit of an insight into the traits of the man, the characteristics of the man. His name has a beautiful meaning. Isaiah means the Lord saves. He is the son of Amos, not Amos, the prophet who has a book by his name, This is Amos. His wife was a prophetess. She was referred to as a prophetess. She may have had a prophetic ministry herself, or it could simply be that she was an able support to her husband. They had 2 sons, and he gave those 2 sons unique names depicting events that were to take place. Now, these events are very hard to pronounce and may also be bizarre to our modern ears, but the name of the first son was Shear Jashub, remnant return. It is saying that God is going to preserve a faithful remnant, and despite the destruction of his people, that faithful remnant will be restored by God. They have a second son. The name of that son is even more descriptive. It is Maher-shalal Hashbaz. I don't imagine any parents naming their children, giving either of these names to their children today. Maher-shalal Hashbaz, it means haste, spoil, speed, prey. It is depicting the series of events, the swiftness, the intensity with which the Assyrian attack will take place. Assyria is going to attack not only the northern kingdom of Israel, but also it is going to turn against Judah. Isaiah lived in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the capital city of the southern kingdom of Judah. He lived there. He ministered in Jerusalem for 53 years. So over 5 decades, he was a faithful minister to God, warning people, pleading with people, appealing to them to turn to God. And he spoke to commoners and to kings alike. He had access to the royal throne. He did not hesitate in bringing God's direct confrontational message to kings. But his heart was with the people. His heart was desperate to get his people to turn toward God, lest destruction fall on them. There were other prophets who were contemporaneous to him and to his ministry. They were Amos, Hosea, Micah. God used several other faithful men along with Isaiah at this time. That is heartening because no matter how bleak the circumstances, God is warning his people. You know, people have no excuse. The people of Israel, neither the people of Judah could ever claim that God did not warn them, that they could not have seen this coming. Absolutely not. Over hundreds of years, God is speaking to his people because he himself wants to relent. He cannot ignore sin. He cannot ignore the rebellion of his people, but he does not want to destroy them. So he's pleading with them earnestly to turn toward him, to be saved, to practice justice, to not oppress the poor in the land, to remember their own condition from which God saved them. The tragic reality of the human situation, and this is true for us now too, as it was then, is that we are very quick to forget all of God's faithfulness, and prosperity can immediately harden our heart toward God and his blessings, and we forget who the giver of those blessings was in the first place. It is believed that Isaiah was actually a man of some influence and prominence. He was the cousin to King Uzziah. He had access to the palace. He was also a close friend of the high priest. He also appears to have been well educated because of the erudite language that he uses in his writing. A lot of the themes that he talks about have to do with injustice in the land, wealth accumulated through inappropriate means, oppression of the poor, emulating the idolatrous practices of the pagan nations that God condemned. So he writes a lot about these events with passionate appeal so that the people would listen to his voice and turn toward God, and God would heal them. God would restore them. Now, as is true with many Old Testament prophetic writings, Isaiah is writing about events that will happen imminently, meaning he's talking about the judgment that will fall on the kingdom of Israel, the judgment that will fall on the kingdom of Judah. But then he also zooms out to look farther. He looks farther into the future, and he's looking at a future when the Messiah will come. So he's talking about events that are more imminent, but he's also taking a very, very distant view, which obviously he could only do empowered by the Spirit of God. So he's not making up stories, he's not concocting events from his own mind, because those could be easily disproven. Now, because we know that all of the prophecies that Isaiah made, and we will view some of them, because all of them have come to pass, we can be confident that the future prophecies that Isaiah talks about will also come to pass. We'll also look at some of the future prophecies that have to do with the future millennial kingdom, the 1,000-year reign of Christ. So there are some really beautiful descriptions of what that kingdom will look like in the book of Isaiah. Now, the tragic story of Isaiah is his death. He was martyred by Manasseh. He was a very evil king in Judah. He was the son of King Hezekiah, who himself was a good king. But Manasseh kills Isaiah, and we know this because of allusions in the book of Hebrews to the tragic deaths of the prophets. One of them was Isaiah. So Isaiah, it is believed according to tradition, was sawed in half by this evil, monstrous king, Manasseh. He sacrificed his own child in the fire. God used Isaiah, however, richly. All of his life, God used Isaiah to deliver graphic object lessons about the vanity of trusting in human power. He exhorts people to not be swayed by trusting in the idols of the nations, or trusting in political alliance, or going after coalitions with neighboring nations, but instead to trust in God alone. The people, however, do not listen, or do not all listen. There are always a group of people who are faithful to God and to his ways, but by and large, they continue in their rebellious ways. And that brings their stories to an unfortunate end. It's not ultimate destruction, because God restores his people, but the judgment that Isaiah prophesies about comes to pass exactly as he says will happen. Let's just zoom out a little bit to take a broader view of the history, right? So look at Isaiah. Isaiah is ministering during the reigns of 4 kings. Remember, his ministry was a long one. It spanned over 50 years. And during this time, he ministered in the reigns of King Uzziah from 769 to 733 BC, followed by Jotham, followed by Ahaz, followed by Hezekiah. So this is a long span of time, over 5 decades. At this time, Isaiah was expanding its dominance. It was becoming the world empire. At the same time, Babylon was a small city at that time on the river Euphrates. It was nowhere close to the power and might of Assyria, although one day it would overthrow Assyria and become the next major global power, but not at this time. At this time, it was Assyria. So Isaiah is writing in this context. Assyria is gaining in importance, in significance. The dread of Assyria is falling on the people. Assyria was known to be a ruthless war machine. They were known for extremely cruel war tactics. They employed psychological warfare and were brutal toward the prisoners of war that they carried into exile. So it's not surprising that people were terrified of Assyria. It was with good reason. Now Isaiah is warning his people, though. He's warning them of the judgment that is going to come, and he's telling them to depend on God. He's condemning the evil practices of the nations, and he's telling them, do not follow after those practices. Isaiah at this time is taking such a long-term view of history that he predicts that not only will Assyria fall, but Babylon will rise, and then Babylon will also fall, right? Now, this must have been very strange to the people who are listening. Why is he talking about Babylon? Babylon is a city-state. This is 100 years before Babylon comes into power, right? But Isaiah, he's not taking a narrow view of immediate events, because for God, politics is not just about immediate geopolitical events, right? There is spiritual significance, there is theological significance to the events that are happening on the world stage. So Isaiah is appropriately taking a much broader view. But Isaiah does not stop his message only with judgment. He predicts that God is going to restore his people. God is going to restore Judah. Ultimately, what he predicts comes to pass with the kingdom of Israel, the northern kingdom, completely destroyed by the Assyrian forces in 722 BC. Okay, so let's continue the history. Here, if you look at the ancient Near East, you will see, like I said earlier, that Assyria was expanding its power, right? Israel and Judah, however, were declining. They had their peak of prosperity during the time of King Solomon, when they were still a united kingdom. And then things have been going for them steadily downward. Now, Judah, unfortunately, is not placed in a very good geopolitical situation, meaning it is trapped between warring superpowers. There's Assyria in the north, and then there is Egypt. Both of them are warring superpowers, both vying for dominance at the same time. Because of this, Judah was attacked many times during the life of Isaiah. There were attacks from the north, there were attacks from, more east, Edom, Philistia, and then there was also an attack by Assyria, which happens during the reign of King Hezekiah. Hezekiah was a good king. He was a man who trusted God, he leaned on God, and God does a lot of restoration during the time of King Hezekiah. We'll actually take a look at some of the events that happened during King Hezekiah's reign, and also, try to apply some of those lessons to our own lives, because they're so rich in application. Now, although Assyria was primarily a threat to the northern kingdom of Israel, Jerusalem and the kingdom of Judea was also threatened. However, it was spared from complete destruction by Assyria, and that's mostly because of the influence of the prophet Isaiah and the prophet Micah, right? They appealed to the conscience of the people, they appealed to the kings, and there was repentance. The people turned from their evil ways and turned to God, and you find that God relents. One such prophecy among the prophecies that I mentioned earlier, and we'll also take a look at this maybe in the next lesson, the next time we meet, Isaiah is predicting the rise of the Emperor Cyrus. Now, this is much after Assyria, after Babylon, and then the Medo-Persian Empire. Cyrus is going to gain power, and he is going to unite the Medo-Persian empires. Isaiah is amazingly predicting the rise of this emperor, Cyrus, not merely by describing him as a distant historical figure, but by identifying him by name. Cyrus, my anointed one, as the Lord is referring to him, is recorded by Isaiah. That is incredible. This is some 150 years before the time of Cyrus. And this is recorded in Isaiah chapter 44. So all of these events that he talks about are historically fulfilled, which is why I was saying that if you're interested in the history, reviewing these events in the books of Kings and Chronicles will be very helpful, because that gives you the historical narrative. So, God is referring to Cyrus as a deliverer, a man who God uses as an instrument to deliver his people, Judah, and to restore them back to their land. But what that prefigures ultimately is something beyond the time of Cyrus, is more than the restoration of the people of Judah to the southern kingdom, to the land, to their promised land. It is prefiguring a greater deliverance that will happen in the future. This one from sin and death and destruction in the truest sense by the Messiah. So this is what makes Isaiah really unique. He's describing so many geopolitical events. He's got an amazing set of predictive prophecies, but he also takes such an expansive view of world events that will happen much after his own lifetime. And that makes Isaiah an absolutely incredible and marvelous book. It is well worth the effort that you will put into it, and it is rich with applications for today. It is not merely describing historical events, but it is relevant for us today because the complexity of the human heart is unchanged. So the tendencies of the people to rebel against God, to forget God's mercies, to take Him for granted, to not think of world events as God being the supreme writer of world events is still true for us today. So we will do well to remember that it is the God of Isaiah, it is the God of the Old Testament who is very much sovereign behind every event and in our own lives today.